My own sister and son-in-law thought I was just a helpless old widow, the perfect target, as they secretly drained my family's entire life savings behind my back. They trapped me in my own home, controlling my calls and isolating me from friends, all while pretending it was for my own good. They were so close to getting away with everything. But they forgot one tiny detail: I was an accountant for 40 years, and I notice when things don't add up. So I played their game and set the stage for a Thanksgiving dinner they would never forget. You know, it's a funny thing sitting at the head of your own dining table and feeling like you're watching a play. And a poorly rehearsed one at that. The crystal glasses were chiming, the roast smelled divine, but the cheerfulness felt brittle, like it could shatter at any moment. My younger sister Carol was holding court, her laughter just a touch too loud, a little too shrill to be genuine. Her hand was resting on my son-in-law Mark's arm, but it wasn't a gesture of casual affection. It looked more like she was staking a claim. And Mark, well, Mark played his part to perfection. The devoted husband to my dear Sarah, the competent manager of the family finances, the rock-solid, reliable man of the house. Anyone else would have bought it. But I spent 40 years of my life as an accountant. My entire career was about spotting discrepancies, finding the one number that didn't add up. I learned to see the same thing in people. I saw the flicker of sheer panic in Carol's eyes when Sarah asked some innocent question about a credit card bill, and I saw how Mark's smile was a perfect, calculated curve that never once managed to warm the coldness in his eyes. This whole performance, this campaign of care, had started about a month ago. It was a slow siege disguised as love. It began with Carol insisting on screening my calls. She'd say it was to protect me from all those predatory telemarketers, you know, the ones who target seniors. Then Mark took over my online accounts, explaining it was all about cybersecurity concerns. Soon, they were intercepting my sweet neighbors at the door, telling them with that saccharine sweetness that I was feeling a bit tired today. They were building a fortress around me, and the bars of this gilded cage were forged from words like love and concern, which made them almost impossible to fight against. They weren't protecting me. They were isolating their asset. The final piece of their plan clicked into place on a Tuesday. The betrayal was wrapped up so neatly in a package of kindness. Mark spread a stack of papers across my polished mahogany desk, his voice as smooth as polished stone. He told me it was just some routine updates for the trust, something about consolidating accounts for better returns. He said it would give Sarah and the kids a much bigger cushion. He pointed to a signature line at the bottom of a document so dense with jargon it would make a lawyer's head spin. He just said to sign right there. So I did. I played the part they'd cast for me, the trusting, slightly dotty widow. I scrawled my name, making sure my hand was perfectly steady. I knew exactly what I was signing. It wasn't a consolidation. It was a complete surrender. A general power of attorney so broad it gave him the keys to the entire kingdom. He thought he was shearing a helpless old sheep. He had no idea he was handing a freshly sharpened razor to a lion that was only pretending to be asleep. That night, after the house had settled into its fake tranquility, I glided down the grand staircase without making a sound. The library door was cracked open just enough for a sliver of light to cut across the Persian rug. And then I heard Carol's voice. It had lost all its forced cheerfulness. Now it was just a raw, panicked whisper. She was talking about how she didn't know how much longer they could keep this up. How a big transfer from the main brokerage account hadn't cleared yet. A jeweler in Bermuda, of all places, was calling her twice a day. She was terrified someone would see the statements. I heard the rustle of paper, and then the final damning words. The deadline for the down payment on their condo was Friday. If they missed it, they would lose everything they'd managed to skim so far. Everything. I melted back into the shadows of the hallway, a cold, hard certainty settling in my gut like a shard of ice. The trap was now officially set. All I had to do was wait. I just had to let the rats get hungry enough, and they would walk right into it themselves. By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now let's get back to it. I spent that night listening to the old house groan and settle, but for the first time in weeks, I wasn't the one feeling trapped. I was the one setting the trap. The knowledge of their Friday deadline was a ticking clock, and I knew I had to make my first move. I chose my moment the next morning with the precision of a surgeon making the first incision. The kitchen was bright with morning light, and my daughter Sarah, my wonderfully kind but tragically oblivious girl, was humming as she arranged a bouquet of lilies. Carol was at the counter scrolling through her phone, trying to project an aura of casual indifference that she just couldn't pull off. I let my voice take on a gentle, grandmotherly quaver. I asked Sarah if she remembered my cousin Susan. I told her I'd had a lovely little chat with her the day before, and that Susan couldn't stop raving about how wonderfully Mark was managing their portfolio. I added a little detail just for spice. I said Susan mentioned he'd put them into some fascinating new tech fund, a real performer. I let the question hang in the air, light as a feather but heavy as a stone. I wondered aloud innocently if he'd done the same for us. The effect was like throwing a rock into a still pond. Carol's head snapped up from her phone, her eyes wide with pure alarm. She shot a look at Sarah so full of venom it could have curdled milk. Sarah, bless her heart, was completely unaware. She just smiled proudly and explained that Mark doesn't discuss specifics with anyone, citing professional discretion. I nodded, pretending to understand, and then turned my innocent old gaze to my sister. I said I just thought since she was keeping such a close eye on things for me that she might have heard him mention it. Carol's face was a mask of forced calm, but her knuckles were bone white where she was gripping her phone. She told me she doesn't meddle, that Mark is the expert. The lie was so thin it was transparent. Later that afternoon, I made sure to be near the open window of the sunroom when they were in the garden. Their voices were hushed, frantic whispers carried on the breeze. Carol was panicking, asking where on earth I could have heard about a tech fund. She reminded him that he was supposed to be reporting standard index fund returns. Mark's reply was a low, angry murmur, but I heard the words, "nosy old woman," as clearly as if he'd shouted them. Their carefully built story was already starting to fray. With the conspirators officially rattled, I seized my chance. They announced they were going out for a necessary shopping trip, which I knew was code for a crisis meeting to get their lies straight. The moment their car pulled away, I went to my husband's old closet. Tucked away in a box of his military medals, I retrieved an old, unregistered burner phone. My fingers, still nimble from 40 years of flying across a 10-key calculator, dialed a number I knew by heart. When he answered, my voice was no longer frail. It was crisp, clear, and all business. I told him it was Helen that I needed him, that the wolves were in the fold. David, my late husband's estate lawyer, and a man whose loyalty was absolute, didn't ask questions. He just asked when and where. My first and most important ally was now secured. The atmosphere in the house changed overnight. The cloying care became suffocating control. Carol now insisted on sitting with me any time I was on the phone, her presence a silent warning. Mark installed new security software on my laptop, which I knew was nothing more than spyware. They thought they were containing a threat locking the cage door after the bird had already learned to pick the lock. I felt a grim satisfaction watching them scramble. They had no idea they were merely tightening the ropes of their own gallows. The game was far from over, and I knew with a chilling certainty it was about to get much more dangerous. With their new security measures in place, the house felt smaller, the air thicker. They were watching my every move, so I decided to give them nothing to watch. A direct assault was foolish. It was time for a strategic retreat. The next morning, as I came down for breakfast, I feigned a sudden dizzy spell, my hand fluttering to my chest, in a way I'd seen in old movies. I allowed my steps to become slow and unsteady, and I let them guide me back to my room, leaning on them just enough to seem frail. From my bed, I saw them exchange a look of triumphant relief. They thought my brief flicker of curiosity the day before had been extinguished by a simple bout of old age. Carol cooed at me to just rest that they would take care of everything as she pulled the curtains and plunged the room into a comforting darkness. Lying there in the quiet, I let my mind drift. I tried to pinpoint the exact moment the rot had set in. I could almost picture it. Maybe 6 months ago in some sleek, impersonal hotel bar in New York City. I could see Mark swirling a glass of expensive scotch, complaining about how I just sit on all that money. How they could actually live, with it a place in the Caymans, a boat, no more listening to my sweet Sarah talk about parent-teacher meetings. And I could see my sister Carol, her face softened by champagne, emboldened by a lifetime of simmering resentment for being the less perfect, less fortunate sister. I could practically hear her whispering that I owed them for all the years she had to live in my shadow. Their affair wasn't just about passion. It was a conspiracy, a shared secret that bound them together. I imagined them later, huddled over a laptop, Mark's face illuminated by the glow of a banking portal as he made that first transfer. Just a small amount a test. The adrenaline, the shared thrill of their betrayal. Their greed wasn't born of need. It was born of pure, corrosive entitlement. It was a desperate, grasping attempt to steal a life they felt they deserved. They believed I was napping, resting my weary old bones, but I was anything but idle. During the day, I played the part of the docile invalid, and at night, I became a ghost in my own house. There's a loose brick in the fireplace my husband Robert and I always used as a hiding spot. Behind it was an old wrought iron key. It opened a dusty footlocker in the attic that held Robert's most private files, the ones he was too old-fashioned to ever digitize. Inside was my ammunition. The original hard copy deeds to properties we held in a separate LLC shielded from the main trust. The actual paper certificates for heirloom stocks that had been in my family for generations. And best of all, a ledger written in my own meticulous accountant's hand, detailing every single asset that predated the trust Mark now believed he controlled. Their arrogance in the end became their undoing. Mark, fully believing I was now a non-threat, grew careless. One afternoon, he left his personal laptop open on the desk in the study while he went to take a call in the garden. I happened to be shuffling by on my way to get a glass of water. A quick glance was all it took. On the screen, plain as day, was a confirmation page. 2 one-way first-class tickets to Grand Cayman for the first week of December. And he'd paid for them with a credit card I'd never seen before. The card was registered to a shell corporation, a name I instantly recognized from Robert's old files. He was getting sloppy, blinded by the fantasy of his new life. He was so focused on the finish line, so sure of his victory, that he completely failed to see the tripwire I had just laid right in front of his feet. With all the pieces in my hand, I simply had to choose the right moment to put them on the table. After a quiet call to David on my burner phone, we decided. The earthquake would arrive on the Saturday before Thanksgiving. I sat in the living room calmly reading a book while Carol and Mark lounged on the sofa opposite me. They were so relaxed, so confident in their victory, already mentally spending their stolen fortune. Then precisely at 1100 a.m., the doorbell rang. David's presence filled the doorway. He's a tall, broad-shouldered man, and in his perfectly tailored suit, holding a leather briefcase that seemed to radiate authority, he was a formidable sight. Carol and Mark froze. Mark, recovering first, jumped up and tried to block the entrance, stammering something about this being a private residence. David's gaze was glacial. He simply stated that he was here at the express invitation of his client, Helen, and that Mark should please step aside. He walked right past them and into the living room, stopping before me. I looked up from my book and gave him a calm smile. My daughter Sarah, who had come in from the kitchen, looked utterly confused, her eyes darting from me to her husband. She wanted to know what was going on. David didn't answer her. Instead, he opened his briefcase and laid a single crisp document on the coffee table between us. He announced to the room that it was a cease and desist order. He also mentioned it was a notification of an impending federal audit of the Armstrong Family Trust, which had been triggered by irregularities. He then said the magic words, a recent transfer to an unaudited offshore shell corporation called Viridian Holdings. The name struck Mark like a physical blow. All the color drained from his face. He choked out that it was a lie, but his eyes, frantic and cornered, darted straight to Carol. David's voice was relentless. He asked if it was a lie because, as he put it, the FBI tends to take a great interest in U.S. citizens moving large untaxed sums to Grand Cayman. Especially, he added, when those funds are used to purchase non-domiciled real estate. That was it. The dam broke. Carol let out a gut-wrenching sob, and her carefully constructed facade just shattered into a million pieces. She started shrieking at Mark, her voice raw with terror and betrayal. She screamed that she had told him it was too risky, that the jeweler was going to be trouble, that he had pushed her into all of this. Mark just wheeled on her, his own panic twisting into pure rage. He snarled back, asking if he pushed her. He reminded her that she was the one who couldn't wait to get her hands on my money, the one who talked about living in my shadow her whole miserable life. It all came pouring out. The affair, the systematic embezzlement, the secret credit cards, the condo in the Caymans. He confessed to everything, not out of remorse, but to drag her down with him. All the while, my poor Sarah just stared, her face a pale mask of disbelief, silent tears streaming down her cheeks as the two people she trusted most in the world ripped each other to shreds and exposed the rotten core of their lives. When they had finally exhausted their venom, a sick silence fell over the room. The power had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer the frail victim. I was the silent, immovable judge. I slowly rose from my chair, and my voice, when I spoke, cut through the tension with a quiet, chilling authority. I told them that was enough. They fell silent, their faces streaked with tears and rage, suddenly looking exactly like what they were frightened children caught in a terrible act. I told them David would see them out, and then I gave my final command. I said they were to be here for Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday. The entire family was coming, and we had a few things to discuss. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. They were powerless now, caught completely in my web, and utterly terrified of the final public judgment that was still to come. Thanksgiving dinner was the stage I had prepared for the final act. The house was filled with the warm, comforting aroma of roast turkey and the oblivious, happy chatter of relatives. I had invited everyone, aunts, uncles, cousins from 3 states. They were all here. And at the center of the long, formal dining table, Carol and Mark sat like death row inmates awaiting the final verdict. Their faces were pale, their smiles stretched into grotesque parodies of holiday cheer that fooled no one who looked closely. My daughter Sarah was a silent, heartbroken ghost, moving through the motions of hosting with a visible effort that pained me to my very core. Seeing her like that, so broken by their betrayal, solidified every ounce of resolve within me. As dessert was served and coffee was poured, I tapped my crystal water glass with a spoon. A hush immediately fell over the table. All eyes turned to me. I began my voice perfectly calm and steady, telling them I had something to share. I gestured to David, who had been standing quietly near the fireplace, a silent guardian throughout the meal. On cue, he moved around the table, handing a slim, unmarked folder to each family member. My eyes locked on Carol and Mark. I told our family that for the past several months, a significant crime had been committed against every single one of us. Gasps rippled around the room. I laid out the truth, systematically, my voice devoid of emotion, presenting the facts as I would have in a boardroom audit decades ago. I explained that Mark, the man entrusted with our family's future, had embezzled over $1.8 million from the trust my husband and I had spent our lives building. I paused, letting the weight of that number sink in. I watched my family stare stunned at the bank statements and transfer logs David had prepared for them inside their folders. Then I continued, turning my gaze slowly from Mark to my sister. I told them he did this with the help of my sister Carol. Another wave of shock, more potent than the first, washed over the room. I explained that they were funding a secret new life together, a life built on a foundation of theft and lies. I let them turn to the final page in the folder. It was a copy of the deed to the Grand Cayman condo, registered in both of their names. It was the undeniable proof. My voice for the first time began to tremble with a raw, controlled fury. I told the room that they were not just stealing money. They were stealing our trust, our memories, our future. The judgment, when it came, didn't come from me. It came from the faces of our family. I saw it in my brother-in-law's look of utter disgust. I saw it in my niece's quiet, horrified tears. I watched Carol and Mark shrink under the collective weight of their condemnation. And I knew that this social ruin, this permanent exile from the family they had betrayed, was a punishment more devastating to them than any prison sentence. My voice dropped to a near whisper. I told them they wouldn't be going to the Caymans. I explained that the power of attorney they had so cleverly tricked me into signing had been immediately nullified by a pre-existing clause in the trust's founding documents, a clever little fail-safe my husband had insisted upon to prevent exactly this kind of malfeasance. The funds were frozen. The authorities had been notified. As if on cue, the doorbell rang through the silent house. David went to answer it. Two polite, grim-faced FBI agents stepped into the foyer. There was no shouting, no struggle, just a quiet, terrible finality. As they were led away, Mark looked back at me, his face a ruin of self-pity. Carol just stared at the floor, utterly broken. I didn't watch them go. My focus was elsewhere. I turned to my daughter, my beautiful wounded Sarah, and pulled her into a fierce, protective embrace. The cancer had been cut out. The long, difficult process of healing could now begin. The aftermath of that Thanksgiving was a landscape of quiet devastation and slow, painful reconstruction. With the evidence David and I had compiled, the legal proceedings were swift and brutal. There was no grand trial, no dramatic courtroom showdown. Faced with an ironclad case for fraud and embezzlement, both Carol and Mark accepted a plea bargain. The sentence came down 5 years in federal prison. Their mugshots appeared for a fleeting moment on the local news, a final humiliating postscript to the life of status they had tried to steal. The authorities seized the condo in the Caymans, and over the next few months, David painstakingly recovered almost every dollar they had taken. From what I heard, their paths in prison diverged almost immediately. Mark, consumed by a bitter, bottomless rage, spent his days writing furious, rambling letters to anyone who would listen. He blamed Carol. He blamed me. He blamed the world for his downfall. He remained a man hollowed out by his own greed, completely incapable of introspection or remorse. But Carol, stripped of her lies, her affair, and her social standing, began a slow, agonizing journey toward accountability. She joined a prison therapy group and for the first time was forced to confront the lifetime of jealousy and resentment that had poisoned her soul. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start. For me, life blossomed. With their suffocating presence gone, it felt like I could finally breathe again. I reconnected with the world. I joined a local investment club, and it was a joy to be in a room where my sharp mind was celebrated instead of dismissed as the ramblings of an old woman. I started volunteering at a financial literacy clinic for domestic abuse survivors, using the hard-won wisdom from my own battle to empower other women. The house, once my silent prison, was now filled with the laughter of friends and the joyful chaos of my grandchildren, who now looked at me with a new kind of respect, seeing me as the pillar of strength I had been forced to become. Sarah and I began the difficult work of rebuilding our relationship. Our conversations were often marked by a painful but necessary honesty, and slowly, brick by brick, we started to build a new foundation of trust. A year later, on a bright autumn afternoon, I was in my garden, my hands in the rich soil, feeling a sense of peace that had been absent for so long. Sarah sat on a nearby bench reading a book, a genuine, relaxed smile gracing her lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The garden gate opened, and the mail carrier handed me a letter. The postmark was from the Federal Correctional Facility. It was from Carol. I read it, my expression unreadable. After a long moment, I folded it neatly and placed it on the small garden table next to my trowel. I didn't burn it, nor did I put it away to be forgotten. I simply left it there, exposed to the sun and the wind and the rain. I had reclaimed my life not through vengeance, but through an unwavering commitment to the truth. I was free, living with a peace and authenticity they could never steal while they remained in a prison of their own, making a just and lasting reality. In the end, Helen's story teaches us that the quietest person in the room is often the most observant. Her battle wasn't won with loud arguments or angry confrontations, but with the cold, undeniable power of the truth. She showed that real justice isn't always about the satisfaction of revenge, but about meticulously reclaiming the peace and security that was stolen. By refusing to be a victim and instead becoming a strategist, she didn't just expose a crime, she cut a cancer out of her family and created the space for true healing to finally begin.